Welcome, everyone. I am so excited to be here with my Shakespeare buddy, Cassidy Cash of That Shakespeare Life. And since it's the 400th anniversary of the publication of the first folio, yay! And that's a big year for us. For those of us who are, I introduced myself yesterday to a group of people as a Shakespeare geek, and I'm very proud of that. So, for those of us who fall in that category, the first folio is a really big deal for a whole bunch of reasons. It's the first collection, the first published collection of all of Shakespeare's plays. Now that title, all of Shakespeare's plays, changes a little. There are a few that get included sometimes and not included other times. But in any case, we would have lost some of our favorite plays without the first folio. So rather than spending a lot of time talking about the history of the printing and all of that, we thought it would be fun to take a couple of our favorite plays that we would not have without the first folio and celebrate the first folio that way. So we're going to both discuss one of our favorite plays. We're going to ask some questions about each of the two plays. And so I'm going to give Cassidy just a moment to introduce her play and tell us what it is she likes so much about this particular play.
Thank you so much, Carol Ann. I'm delighted to be here and discuss this. Just the other day, my son was asking me, how many plays did Shakespeare write? And I was like, well, how much time do you have? I have to answer that a little carefully. But
Uh-huh.
one of the plays that I like the best from the first folio, and there's a lot to like, but I have picked The Tempest. And the things I like about it are it has a shipwreck and violent storms, magic and wizardry, which are all great visuals to go and see performed in a theater. They're so much fun. I have yet to see a company do it badly. I mean, if you're getting creative and putting that out there, it's always fun to be an audience member for that. But then there's also a library, and the importance of books and reading comes up in this play. And then, of course, the characters play the game of chess throughout the play. Chess is actually a theme for The Tempest, and that is a game that I love. And it's fun to see it performed on stage because it's not one that you see often, especially in Shakespeare's other plays. And of course, all of this is happening on an island and people wandering around on a beach, which is great fun. So there's a lot to really like about The Tempest.
Oh, that's wonderful. And it is one of those just real crowd pleasers and fun. I have chosen another crowd pleaser. There again, a lot of plays I really love. But Macbeth, I can say that because I'm sitting in my home office, which is in no way a theater, also known as the Scottish play, because there is a legend. And that's one of the things I love right at the beginning, right at the name of the play. There's a whole legend that it's very, very bad luck to say Macbeth, referring either to the play or to the character if you are
I
in a
flinch just with
theater.
you saying it, sitting over here. I'm like, wait, I've got to
Wait,
stand up
be
and spin
careful.
around.
Yes, yes. There's a whole elaborate uh, thing you need to do if you do accidentally say it in a theater. And so I have done a little bit of research into where that started. There are all kinds of different theories. It starts right from Shakespeare's creation of the play. And apparently, according to one legend, the very first time it was performed, one of the characters, one of the actors, in fact, the one who was going to play Lady Macbeth, died right before the performance was about to begin.
Oh,
And so Shakespeare had to jump in and play the part.
there
So
you go.
now who knows if that's true, but that's one legend. There are all kinds of other legends about different actors dying. And then, of course, the Astor Street riots, the riots around the theater. And let me just double check the year because I often get that wrong. Okay, so it's in 1849. So the two actors, William Charles Macready and Edward Forrest, were sort of dueling Macbeth. They were playing on two different stages in New York, and it became such a thing that it went out into the streets. 25 people were killed in this riot, more than 100 people were injured. And all of this has become associated with the play and with even naming the play. And another legend I found that I also liked is that when a new play is being performed in a theater, they don't ever want anyone to say Macbeth because the theater owner, if this new play fails, will always have Macbeth. It's always a crowd pleaser. It's always popular. And so that is lurking in the background. And if you say it, sort of invoke your own new play, if you're a new playwright, to be axed. So all kinds of reasons not to say Macbeth, which we'll be saying. So that's one of the reasons. There are a lot of reasons I love that play. But anyway, so we are going to be talking about these two plays in particular and productions and lines and all of that kind of thing. So I am going to sort of go back to the Tempest and ask for some of your favorite characters, Cassidy.
Oh, well, there's a lot of characters to like, and I do like Prospero, so I'll give him a shout out. But I think if I had to pick one favorite from the play, it's probably Miranda. She's the only female character to appear on stage in this play, and I like how optimistic she remains throughout a great deal of challenges, both personally and morally. And it's one of the things where if you're reading through this play, you don't necessarily notice that she's the only woman that appears on stage. But when you're seeing it in the theater, it stands out more. And so when she makes her entrances and her exits, you're like, oh, there's everybody's a guy, And so I think holding your own in that kind of production is pretty cool too, and especially in context of Shakespeare's plays, it's fun to think about what that reality would have been like when the company was all guys. And so you've got the one guy. I almost wonder if it was comedic at the time, if but I don't know. But anyway, I think that she's probably my favorite from that play.
Well, that's great. And she is one, we do some talking sometimes about women in Shakespeare. And I just did a thing for a group about strong women and strong voices of women. And Miranda is great because she does have a lot to say and make some really great observations. So, all right. Now, it's hard in a play like Macbeth because there are a lot of really strong characters, but I have to say, and I know it's more than one character, but the witches are just wonderful. And they give us an opportunity to get into the world of Shakespeare's time because witches um, were a huge topic, especially when James came to the throne. He was a real witch hunter. He's the only monarch to have written a book about how to identify a witch and catch a witch and get rid of a witch. And he really was known as a witch hunter. So to have a play that sort of toyed with witches is really interesting and would have been frightening to audience members because that belief was real at that time and there was so much fear around it. Now we now read about or talk about the witches and it's sort of fun and we see things like double double toil and trouble, that those phrases go everywhere and a lot of kids know them and all of that, and that's fun now. But I do like to also remember that at the time it would have been scary. It would have been a little shiver down the spine. And to really go there, for Shakespeare to really go into that world and give those characters a lot of lines and potentially a lot of responsibility. There are a lot of questions. Do the witches make Macbeth take these actions? Or do they just inspire them? And all of that's going on. So I think those characters are great together. They do speak separately, but they are often just kind of seen together, the three witches especially, and they come in and out throughout the play. And they start speaking in one place, and then Macbeth is going to them in another place. And so they're just so important to the action. The play could not exist, just like with Miranda. The play could not exist without that character. Play could not exist without the witches. All right. Now, I just want to say, is there any other character you also want to talk about? Maybe a second favorite or anything?
A second favorite. Well, you can't not talk about Caliban, I think. And he's, I don't know, the history behind his character is wild to me, of all the different influences that he might represent. But the idea of him being, a monster or this thing from a foreign land really ties back into some of the cultural history that was going on in England at the time with the exploration to wild islands. There were stories coming back from Bermuda, and there were stories coming back from the Caribbean, and they were, stories coming back from the Gulf Coast of Mexico there, and just the battles with the Spanish and the different groups of people that the English had never heard of before, and now they're landing. And so the whole idea of finding an island person and what are they going to be like, and his plight during the play, I think he definitely is one that could be interpreted a wild variety of ways. So it's always exciting to see the play performed because you think you know Shakespeare's Caliban, and then to see different companies interpret the same lines and same stage directions in these hugely different ways. It's like you wonder what it would have been like to see it in the 16th century. Like, do we really know what Shakespeare would have done? Because you can take this character in so many directions.
Oh, that's great. That's great. And I love that reminding us. I love the way you remind us that in his time, it might be a different interpretation than we would see it now. And I always like to remind people that even though here we are 400 years later, talking about and celebrating and getting excited about Shakespeare, he was writing for his audience. He was not writing for us.
Absolutely. Yes. I wish we had like a banner we could put that above. Like, I feel like it should go across all the copies of the books. Like, when you see this.
Yeah, right, right. And so from our perspective, and yet I think a lot of people find it impossible not to bring our own perspective and to almost imagine Shakespeare's writing for us. And that is one of my second favorite characters in Macbeth, Lady Macbeth. And she is so often these days, I mean, recently evoked as standing in for a woman who speaks too much or a woman who is too ambitious. And we often see these kinds of women called, oh, she's a Lady Macbeth. And it's a criticism, it's an insult. It means you're too loud, you're too ambitious, you're too outspoken. And it's very interesting because although again, Shakespeare wasn't writing for us or our time, but this is an interesting character in his time as well, because Macbeth and Lady Macbeth actually at the beginning of the play seem to have a really interesting and good relationship. They're speaking to each other in very respectful ways. They are communicating with each other. They're sharing everything with each other. She's the person he goes to immediately when this happens. And so it's this really interesting relationship. And then throughout the play, it becomes a very different kind of relationship. But she is someone that I think really grabs our attention and would have done so in Shakespeare's time as well. And I just find, again, her voice so interesting in the way she calls him out sometimes and calls other people out. And then at the same time, she's trying to smooth everything over when he's seeing the ghost at the dinner scene. I mean, she's just a really important character and
Absolutely. Yeah.
and jumps into our time as well. So, okay, all right. Now, I would love you've talked about a couple of performances and we know Shakespeare was meant to be performed and to be seen and heard. And so what are some of your favorite performances of The Tempest?
I can't call out any one production, and I think that that's because it's been so long since I've seen it performed in stage. I was trying to think of an answer to this question, and I can't give props to any one playing company. I will say I saw a production of Twelfth Night, which has a lot, of course, similar shipwreck and storms going on in it, at the Alabama Shakespeare Company. So I feel like and they did a great job. I was mesmerized. And they have a really small stage there. When you go in, it's really tiny, and they did these massive visuals. So I feel like if I can future view, I would really like to see the Alabama Shakespeare Company do The Tempest, because I feel like it would be really fun to go see it there.
Okay, that's great. Well, when I was I have to say that this question was one of the reasons that I chose this play. I do love this play, and there are a lot of things about Macbeth I really love. But I saw a production here in DC where, I love the witches, so that was something I was really paying attention to. So we see them around the cauldron and the double double, and we see all that, and we see them in these costumes. And then the witches in this production put up their hood. So they sort of covered their, hair that was very dramatic. And then they became servants in the household. So they were visible to us as an audience on the stage all the time. So they're in Macbeth's household. They're there when he's talking to Lady Macbeth. They're there when they're planning. They're there when the king comes. They're on stage all the time. And so that idea of the omnipresent presence of these witches was just fascinating to me. And I thought a really interesting production decision. Of course, it's not in the play, but it was a really interesting way. And then when they would go back out into their witch role, they would just take the hood off. And then you could see these dramatically made up faces, and the hair was a real message of their being a witch. But it was just really interesting how they would then blend into the household and watch every move Macbeth made. And I found that really fascinating and very eerie. It was just hard to ever let them go because they were right there all the time.
Wow.
Yeah, it was
That
it
sounds
was
like a powerful look at it.
it was a really powerful look, and it made it really scary in a way that I mean, I've seen some other really great productions, but this one I was really uncomfortable. I mean, I was just nervous all the time because there they are all the time.
Isn't that fun when like you totally know what the story is going to be and you're still affected by the performance? I think that's wonderful.
Yeah.
Props to the playing company for
Yeah,
sure.
absolutely. It was just great and just haunting. And so I had to say that because that was just amazing. Okay, so we've talked about what we really like about these two plays that come to us through the first folio and productions and characters and all that. But I want to just ask, when we think about Shakespeare and the first folio, we would only have half the plays without the first folio, and these are a couple we wouldn't have. So why do you think it's important for us to have the Tempest? What does the Tempest give us in his time, but also today, because we wouldn't have it without the first folio?
As far as we know, The Tempest is the last play that Shakespeare wrote on his own. Now, this is assuming there haven't been any discoveries in the co-authorship department recently, so make sure you check all of your boxes for lost plays and things like that. So I say that with all the caveats. But while the first recorded performance was at court for King James, there's some evidence to suggest The Tempest might have been one of the first performances staged at Shakespeare's Blackfriars Theater, which I love. It was an indoor theater lit by candlelight, and I think there's a lot to unpack about what that might reveal about the new venue and how the play was performed in that space. Now, in terms of historical importance, the play helps connect Shakespeare to other parts of history and plays a really important role in our understanding of Shakespeare's place in current events for the 16th and 17th century. Now, we've already talked a little bit about the exploration that was going on in England and the world at this time, but when Shakespeare wrote The Tempest, we think he may have based many parts of the story on real events that happened to a ship named the Sea Venture, and specifically a man named Stephen Hopkins. If you'll indulge me slightly, I'll
Mhm.
tell you the brief version of this story and how it connects to The Tempest. On June 2nd, 1609, a ship named the Sea Venture set sail for Jamestown, Virginia. On the way, the ship was blown off course by a horrible hurricane. The storm badly damaged the ship, and all hands on board fought off the rising water until the ship ran aground on the island of Bermuda. After salvaging parts of the Sea Venture to build another ship, the stranded group set sail again for Jamestown and finally made it to their destination in Virginia on May 10th of 1610. Now, news of this shipwreck and tales of the castaways traveled all the way back to England, due in no small part to a publication by one of the Sea Venture travelers named William Strachey, who wrote dramatic tales about this whole adventure, including one incident in Bermuda involving an indentured servant named Stephen Hopkins, he was accused of mutiny, and he narrowly escaped death. I mean, he basically sweet-talked his way out of not getting executed. Now, Stephen Hopkins not only survived the Sea Venture hurricane, but he traveled 11 years later on the Mayflower as both a guide and a father to Oceanus, the only child born on the Mayflower while the ship was at sea. The dramatic life of Stephen Hopkins seems to have inspired William Shakespeare for the play The Tempest, and specifically the character of Stephano, who comes to
Mhm.
life in Shakespeare's performance. And remember, this was just 1 year after the cast and crew of the Sea Venture landed in Jamestown, because according to most dating estimates, The Tempest was written between 1610 and 1611, right when these events were happening and were major current events for Shakespeare. Now, we've covered this story in depth on our podcast, and I've given links
Mhm.
to Carol Ann. So if you want to go into the deep version,
We'll have it.
you can check that out. But this is the short version, and that's one of the things I really think is important about The Tempest, because it helps us see what were they thinking about in terms of these events and what was going on. It helps us make those connections.
That's great, and it's really placing Shakespeare in his time, and you can see, just like, productions of theater and television today are aware of our time, and so 400 years from now, people might study some of our entertainment to see what we're thinking about and what's on our minds. And Shakespeare very much was writing about what was on people's minds. So that's great. That's great. And I think it's exciting to know that these adventures at sea, because there's a lot of shipwreck in Shakespeare, but that was really something that people were thinking about. And that's one of the ways they process the information is they'd see it on stage and they'd talk about it in the theater. And so that's wonderful. And actually, it's a very similar reason that I really think Macbeth is important. Now, it's short in terms of Shakespeare's plays. Macbeth is short. And one of the things I'll just put in a little caveat, because you all know I was at the Folger Shakespeare Library. I still am a reader there, but I used to be lucky enough to be an employee there and work in the education department. And one of the things we would do especially with our elementary school programs, Macbeth is a really great play because it's short and it's a single storyline and it's so dramatic. It's very easy for the kids to understand what's happening, and the lines are so great. But it also gives us a really fascinating view into what's going on in Shakespeare's time, because this is a play that was written shortly after the gunpowder plot. So we have James on the throne. He has a bunch of really tough things happen after he comes to the throne. So Elizabeth dies in 1603, comes to the throne, and before he has practically time to get settled, there's a gunpowder plot and there's a great fire. All these things are happening. And he is someone, as king, he really believes in the divine right of kings, but he's also terrified of assassination, especially after the gunpowder plot. And so the idea of a monarch being assassinated was very much on his mind and on the mind of people at court, which we do see in Macbeth. But the other thing we see is the question of equivocation. And there was a treatise written about equivocation. So during the religious battles between, we use the words Protestant and Catholics to talk about that. Of course, those religions did not mean exactly then what they mean now, but between the two religions going on, and there were Jesuits being smuggled into the country to try and continue to lead a Catholic rebellion to restore, in hopes, a Catholic to the throne. And yet, when they were questioned by authorities, they did not want to be directly lying because that would put their eternal salvation in question. And so there was a whole treatise about the treatise of equivocation, which was written to teach Catholics how to answer these questions. And so rather than saying, no, a priest has never come into my house, you would say something like, a priest has never crossed this threshold, or a priest has never come through this door because he crawled through the window. So you're telling the truth. A priest has never crossed this threshold. But
Slicing those
yes,
technicalities.
yes, that's right. And you see that in this treatise of equivocation. You see that in the way that the answers were given in interrogations. And you see that in Macbeth. Macbeth really explores that in big and small ways. And they use the word equivocation. In Act 2, Scene 3, we have a reference to an equivocator that could swear in both the scales against either scale. So you think of the scales against each other. And the whole idea of light and dark and good and evil, there's language that really plays with those, right up to the witches saying things like, till Burnham Woods come to Dunsinane. And Macbeth thinks, well, good, that can never happen. And then you have people taking branches from Burnham Woods and going to Dunsinane, and suddenly the woods are there. So you have these ideas of equivocation that, again, just like with the Tempest, that relate to what's going on at the time, to what's happening, what people are concerned about. That places right in Shakespeare's England, right in the court of James the First, with these very prevalent worries and concerns and current events, and the way people are dealing with them and the things people are looking for. and a play that I would have to say, all these years later, the idea of slicing the truth and rephrasing it and fake news, all of that has not entirely gone away. And so both just like our fascination with current events and that spills into what happens in current theater or current entertainment of any kind. So both cases in different ways, we do see a slice of what people are thinking about.
Yeah, I mean, the technology, the clothes, and who's the hippest musician in town may change over the years, but humans are humans, even 400 years ago.
Right, absolutely. And you can see often what people are really interested in and concerned about because that's what shows up in these plays. And Shakespeare, one of the reasons I think, and we can talk about this a lot, he really gets the human condition and is very good at really exploring and asking a lot of questions about what people are thinking about and what's going on with them. Okay, so hopefully we have convinced you about the importance of these two plays. So I just want to see if you have any final words you want to leave us about the Tempest, and then we're going to talk about all the stuff you're doing, Cassidy. But before we do that, let's just see if you have any final words about the Tempest.
Definitely go see it performed in a theater. 100%.
Okay. Okay.
Don't miss that opportunity. And I was looking it up. I think Loyola University is doing it this summer because I was trying to find it. So if you're anywhere near Maryland, go by Loyola University. Will be doing the Tempest this summer. So
Well, that's great. Large productions, small productions, and sometimes small productions are so great
they're so
because,
much fun. You usually get to
yeah,
interact with the cast at the smaller ones, which is always fun. So
always fun, and they're just right there. They're just right in front of you. So that's great. And I would just like to just remind us all that Macbeth has shown up in all kinds of other venues or entertainment. So we have, and I'm going to encourage you all to look for these. We have a line in Beauty and the Beast in the Disney movie of that. We have some lines in the Harry Potter movies. Of course, they are about witches and wizards and all of that. There's quite a bit of the Tempest, I mean, of Macbeth, and also in Hamilton. And so, right up to the present, those words and images and ideas are found, and it's true of the Tempest as well. So thank you for that. Now, I want to talk to Cassidy about some of all of the other things. She has some great stuff going on. So tell us about some of the stuff you have going on.
oh, well, thank you. If I mentioned earlier that chess plays a prominent role in Shakespeare's The Tempest, and you may find it fun to find out that chess was actually called the philosopher's game during Shakespeare's lifetime. And yes, there's a lot of connection between the character of Prospero and why chess specifically features prominently in that play. But if you like that kind of thing and want to play those games on your own, I actually have a series of activity kits that we offer to patrons of our Experienced Shakespeare tier on Patreon. And so there's recipes, games, and crafts in there, like the Philosopher's Game, that you can learn how to play. And then for the Philosopher's Game specifically, it requires some specialty pieces. And I created a digital download that lets you just print them off and cut them out so you can actually play it at home or in your classroom right there. And it walks you through where it ties into the Tempest, how to play. And then, of course, you have all the pieces you need to play it right there. So that's something fun I wanted to give a shout out. If that sounds like something exciting for you, then you can find that at patreon.com/that Shakespeare life. And as far as projects I'm working on right now, I'm having a lot of fun illustrating buildings and locations from Shakespeare's lifetime. I am an artist and I work specifically on historical maps and illustrated travel itineraries for historical places. That's a super niche artistic bent, but that is where I operate. I've got one new map coming out this summer, which I'm thrilled about. And then if you read Tudor Places magazine, I was recently had some of my maps featured in there, and that was a really fun honor. So I'm really enjoying working on those.
Right. And I hadn't realized until recently how much of that you were doing. So I really appreciate you mentioning that because I'm reading Tudor Places thinking, wow, look.
That's so awesome.
Yeah, it's great and they are beautiful. So I encourage you to look for those. And also there's lots and lots and lots going on at that Shakespeare Life. And so I will have all those links. Cassidy's been generous enough to share some links to some of the other if you're teaching plays, if you're an educator, if you just really enjoy it and want to have some fun at home, lots of links that she's sharing and I will share with you so that you can, spend some time and really get into it. There's just so much we can do just with a scene or just with some characters. And so the thing that always makes me sad is when we think about in our time, we sometimes think about Shakespeare as being all serious and you have to get all dressed up and sit quietly and go to a show, and it's all hard to understand. And in fact, it was designed for everyone. His theaters in his day were full of people who could not even read. And those were probably outnumbered the people, the groundlings really outnumbered everybody else.
100%. Yes. And they'd have their ale and their hazelnuts standing in the theater being loud and raucous during the
Loud.
performance, too. So,
Yes, and food was sold and people were bumping into each other, and it was just you went there to have a really good time, and that is really possible, and that's what I hope you're getting from us is how much we enjoy. We don't find it put offish, we find it fun and fascinating, sometimes scary, sometimes laugh out loud hilarious, but always fun. So hopefully you can enjoy that. So, Cassidy, any final words to say about Shakespeare or what you're doing or anything where we can find you?
oh, I completely agree with what that you've suggested. And the more you learn, the more fun Shakespeare gets. And yes, if you'd like to learn Shakespeare history along with me, you can find me at CassidyCash.com.
All right. And that Shakespeare Life, I'll have all those links. And just remember that, and it says this right in the first folio, that it's written for everybody, including, and I quote, him that can but spell. And spelling was not a big deal. People spell things any which way.
Which
So
is so
it
great for me because I'm not a good speller.
so just say you're evoking your Shakespeare. It's your inner Shakespeare that makes you spell things differently every time.
Absolutely.
So it really is fun, and we both encourage you to have some fun with Shakespeare. Go see a performance, see part of a performance. I ran into some folks from Guildhall Shakespeare, and they were having so much fun just doing Shakespeare on the cruise. It was the Bard on board, and it was just great. So there are all kinds of fun ways to experience Shakespeare, and I appreciate Cassidy and that Shakespeare Life joining us and taking a little time. We're near Shakespeare's birthday. We're celebrating the first folio. So enjoy and have some fun with Shakespeare. And thank you so much for joining us.